My name is Soto, and I'm here with Joseph Zadeh. And today we're going to speak about the dark web. It's not the deep web. The deep web, I would explain what's the difference between the deep web and dark web. So there was some correction that needed to be done there. This is some research work we've been doing for quite a bit. And we presented this actually at the UE, Underground Economy Conference in 2018 in Strasbourg, France. So there's a lot to cover, so I'm going to go, and some of the slides may go faster, but the bottom line is that you understand that there are, what I want you, or what we want you to get from this presentation is two things. One, there are tools that can be used to fight against human trafficking, and two, you can help. So let's start. So Joe and I have been working together at Splunk for some time. Then we went to a startup, and then we came back to Splunk. And we started originally at Caspita before it was acquired by Splunk. So we worked together for some time, and we're currently a Splunk security research team. Okay, so let's get on to it. Basically, is deep and dark web the same? The answer is no. The surface web is what is known as the clear internet. Deep web is anything that has some sort of a password paywall. And then the dark web, which is usually composed by .onion, darknets, I2P, stuff like that. And obviously the content, you can see the deeper we go, the darker we get, so does the content. I will not be showing very hardcore stuff, but you'll be able to basically get the message. Within the dark web, there's also the darkness. So the darkness are things such as Freenet, I2P, or Riffle. And basically, these are tools that can create peer-to-peer sort of darknets where individuals can transfer information or can host websites or share files. And these things are many times are ecosystems that are very difficult to tamper in and can be used operationally for crime, and particularly human trafficking. So how do I access the dark web? Mainly via Tor, which is called the Onion Land. Includes part of the deep web, but not all of it. In some cases, if you can actually, for example, browse I2P via adjusting the Tor browser, it's not indexed by standard search engines. It provides a comfortable level of anonymity. It's heavily monitored and regulated by law enforcement. It has low latency, and a lot of it is driven by cryptocurrencies. So here's some screenshots I took of my recent. I was just you download. You go to torproject.org. You execute it, and then you go about browsing. There are basically it's almost like the internet of the 90s, where there were really not straight up search engines. You just click on links that are being sort of outlined in pages, and they're taken down all the time because it's heavily monitored. I can tell you, I used to work at a company that looked at around 30% of the traffic of the internet, and one of the things that was the most monitored was Tor. In fact, if you wanted to be noticed, you go to Tor, they will be watching. So I used to tell people, you have a higher chance of being caught if you use Tor. And there are deobfuscation techniques. So here's an example of a dark website. This is assassinations. So you see the pricing right there: life ruining, assassinations, crippling acid attack, and this is their message: death and destruction. So these are groups that are advertise services on the dark web. Here's, for example, fake passports, fake IDs, probably very popular right now. And here's, of course, what we're talking about. Here's a website that I obviously, for obvious reasons, I cut off, but this is some of the things that they promise to offer, right? So this stuff is being advertised. It's clear. You got to be careful when you do this as a research. We use since I've been sort of related on researching on the internet, there's usually what is called a policy for unintended exposure. You don't want to be exposed to these things. When you go on the dark web, it's almost impossible not to come across these things. So if you are doing this, you should have a policy for unintended exposure. Usually it involves destroying the device. That's at least when I was at this internet company, you had to make a report. We were in a SOC that it was almost impossible because we were seeing almost everything. We were at ASN. And you report it, you take the computer, and they destroy it. And it's kept for law enforcement purposes. But here's I mean, this is, I just took a phrase, right? This is part of something else. So the cryptocurrencies are the big enablers, right? So it's interesting that how they're asking people, hey, if you upload videos like the one we just asked you for, you can use the following services. So they have Anon File, Mega, and WeTransfer. And you see the Bitcoin and Ethereum. I was surprised because I've been doing this for a bit that they're still using the main cryptocurrencies, which is Bitcoin or Ethereum. There is a higher level of anonymity cryptocurrencies, which is things like Monero, or Verge, or Zcash. I have found out that for some reason they don't see the value in this. Monero was at one point around $300, but since then has come down. And Bitcoin is the king. It still is the king, and they still use it. And now, talking about transactions, there's no honor among thieves, right? So if you go on the actual dark web, there are like the systems of these honor systems, and usually they're composed of rules that involve an escrow. An escrow is a third party that you pay, you do the transaction, and then they pay the provider of the service and to avoid what is called the exit scam. They call it exit scam. So here's a service, an escrow service. Not only there's an escrow service, there's a vetting service, and most of these forums is not easy. In order to penetrate them, it takes years. You sort of have to create a digital persona that emulates a criminal. Of course, there's lots of risks in it, and there's plenty of law enforcement and informants in it. So it's really, it's very murky. There are some services that they can index the dark web, and usually they do it in plain text, so there's no exposure to images or stuff like that. So here's something that we thought was going to go away, but it did not, and it's the mixers, the tumblers. Mixers and tumblers is when you do a transaction, and they basically create a number of random addresses in order to obfuscate where the payment is coming from. So that's an example of it. You can still trace Bitcoin. I've done investigations where I traced malicious actors by using their hashes. This hash is from that side that I cut off, and I can tell you they have 165 transactions just on that hash, right? And you can see here how it's clearly them trying to obfuscate. So that was around $30,000 on just published hash. I don't know if this guy's at anywhere else. Forums, darkness. And that's one of the things that we want to emphasize here. There is several elements in this chain of human trafficking that need to be addressed, and we have not only some tools that are available. Joe's going to explain a little bit of the machine learning and big data tables that are being used. I went myself today. I used an API of a facial recognition, and you will see it. It shows that it even gets very close to my age and everything. You will see it at the end. So pretty quick, why is cryptocurrency preferred? It's decentralized, so you can't take it down. It's anonymous for the most part. It's not regulated. It's accepted worldwide. And again, BTC still the king. So all these other higher level anonymity currencies, for some reason, did not take off. My guess is because it requires a higher level of skill. I have found in my investigations that basically you have several, the main elements are the producers, the guys that record, the guy that kidnap, recruit. You have the brokers, which may or may not be consumers, right? They might have a forum. They might know people who know people. They still benefit from it. And then you have the consumers, obviously. And then in the center of all this is the victims. So you had to sort of discern the chain of this by understanding that there are elements of this change they're just focused on producing. Others are the consumers, the ones that go out and try to find this. And obviously the brokers. The brokers usually is where the higher level of skills are. They're the ones that create the forums, the ones that tell you, hey, use this type of encryption, go to the site, take off the EXIF data because they know they're being monitored. So here's some elements that I have found during my investigation. So dark web forums are the center point of distribution. They advertise and in many cases distribute. They use several mechanisms to bet and sort of stop surveillance and obfuscate possible prosecution. The content sites tend to be transient and not indexed. Basically, they will send you something that they know eventually somebody will report, they will take it down. The ClearNet sites, forums, and social networks are usually used for directing consumers to the dark web, darknet resources, and recruiting. I know because I have friends, for example, at work, that have a colleague at the delivery fund. He told me there's around 3 weeks. From the time that a girl starts talking to one of these recruiters, it takes around 3 weeks to encounter an impossible kidnap. So this is happening right now. This is happening right now. Of course, the cryptocurrency has become the big deal about this. Anonymity tools require higher tech level skills. So you're talking about somebody that needs to understand what Tor is, probably prone to make offset failures, like uploading pictures with geolocation data, not changing their cell phones. They tend to do that. They use burners. They move around with their victims as well. So in my opinion, the tech skill determines the value of the target, right? And in my opinion, the brokers are the enablers, right? Obviously, the other tools are there to do a transaction. But the brokers at times are the ones that provide that layer of obfuscation in order to prevent prosecution and surveillance. So regardless of the tech skills, which is they create digital personas, their post contents, their verbatim, geolocation, they can be traced. This stuff can be traced and identified. So with that, I'm going to pass it to Joe. And we're going to talk a little bit of data-driven techniques. And then at the end, we're going to give you we're going to show you a demo of how these tools work and what is the efforts that are being done at the community level. So go ahead.
All right, thanks, Rod. This project kind of came out of one of the more sort of fun volunteer efforts we've been involved in sort of our careers, and it's just about sort of mixing NGOs and hacktivism with some of the kind of street smarts that hackers bring to the table. And there's a long history here going back to I think the first people I learned about doing this, like in the 90s, was a group called EHAPA, Ethical Hackers Against Pedophilia. And back in the day, they would just kind of target people online who they knew were kind of using BBSs and just old school sort of kind of forums where they were just posting pictures of kids or people who are basically victims of very serious crimes. And it turns out it's really kind of hard to prosecute in these cases because the threat actors can kind of take advantage of a lot of things like moving across countries and changing sort of the way evidence is prosecuted and used in one sort of region, going from like North America to Europe, for instance. So I think this is just sort of a fascinating mix of problems that unfortunately doesn't really get the attention it deserves from government. So there's sort of this gray area where there's not enough kind of commercial incentive to really kind of invest in this to make money, and at the high level, governments just aren't able to throw the resources at this problem that it really needs. Some of the crazy facts, if you look on like the UN report on human trafficking from a year or two ago, there's an estimate of about 40 million people in some form of modern slavery today, and it breaks down across a couple different profiles. But one of the biggest ones is women and children who are being kind of moved around for sex trafficking and kind of the like. So it's a pretty serious topic. I think where we kind of plugged in and had some sort of fascinating interactions with just NGOs and groups that are sort of just volunteering time and getting engineers to really kind of like help do the heavy lifting with the technology and the integration and how you can correlate sort of the multi-intelligence fusion necessary to take anonymous forum posts and match them to images, where eventually, I think this is a really cool example of a sort of a proof of concept where just if you're in a hotel room and you take a picture of like just the background imaging in the hotel, what this and uploading it to this trafficcam.com, what you're sort of doing is you're helping kind of build a big data repository of background sort of information that can help Interpol triangulate. If a picture is posted with like a victim in it, then all Interpol needs is sort of the like an example of a light socket to sort of triangulate to like a local region, and then sort of help kind of get boots on the ground once they're sort of able to kind of narrow down where the kind of the space of possible like just kidnapping and all these things that are going on is. So these are some cool examples. Splunk's invested about, I think, like $100 million in these non-for-profit and basically data science for good efforts, and this is sort of one of the models that kind of came out of a hackathon we were doing at Splunk a couple years ago with Facebook and a company called Global Emancipation Network and Thorn. We were using essentially basically like the model we were building was based off this sort of concept that we wanted to give us insight into who are the content producers on some dark web forums that the NGOs we were working with had fished essentially 6 months of data from these forums in collaboration with the FBI. So they basically got an account to a dark web forum that is just a known like producer of CP, and there's a lot of morbid content on there, but what we ended up doing was basically modeling the anonymous interactions in a way that we could kind of distill down who's consuming the content and who's producing the content. There's a bunch of tricks that go into this kind of model, and we can kind of get into the algorithm. If you're really interested in the details, come talk to me afterward, but essentially what we're doing is we're kind of building a graph on top of each interaction basically represents an edge, and we can see who initiated the forum post and who's kind of like using it in just the data we scraped. And so this let us kind of get a graph of all the people for the last 6 months that used this forum and how they were kind of consuming the data. Were they producing more of it, or were they just kind of using it like end users? And then on top of that, we use something, just standard natural language processing tricks to kind of extract the right evidence from the small subset of users that are essentially the producers of the content. And that means they're sort of uploading lots of photos and things that essentially can be used to do like build a case against like some of the actionable incidents that eventually go to law enforcement in this sort of data set. I think what is pretty fascinating, if you kind of sort of step back and for me, like I spent a lot of time in cybersecurity kind of corporate environments, helping find malware and incidents that are of a little bit more of a kind of have a business impact, but not necessarily like just like don't have sort of the same sort of moral or ethical kind of just challenge that comes up when there's real victims involved whose rights are being like violated in the most extreme sense. And I think it always kind of just resonates with me talking to some of these guys who'd left the corporate world, gone to the NGOs. One of them was a Google engineer, and he's like, I took a huge pay cut. Now I'm helping fight human trafficking for a company called Thorn. And he's like, in the last year, I've seen 8 kids be rescued, just doing some of these type of like correlations and just building big data tools to help law enforcement. And he said, that was so much more meaningful for me than hunting a bunch more ransomware on Google's network. And I think that's kind of one of the reasons I like this topic, because it's pretty serious. But if you even have a little bit of an interest in it, I just recommend kind of following up with some of the links we have here and just kind of running with some of the stories that are interesting and seeing if there's any way you can plug in, because at the end of the day, it's really a big volunteer effort. And it's just, this talk is kind of, for us, always just a call to arms. Like, be aware this is a problem. And if you're interested, there's so many different ways you can plug in. Come talk to us afterward, or Splunk and Microsoft and a few of these big companies all have ways you can just plug in. And so this is just another kind of tool we end up using a lot for the problem of kind of doing similarity matches against images. The hackathon we were originally at, the Microsoft guys sent the PhotoDNA team to basically do this proof of concept of matching images from missing persons reports in California. There was like about 5,000 missing persons. And what they did was they took posts from 6 months of form scrapes on websites like Backpage, and they took the missing persons and they used PhotoDNA to correlate the images from each one of those missing persons reports to escort ads that had images in them. And it turns out with PhotoDNA, this is kind of a silly example, but this is someone's face who's maybe 10 years younger than this same face, two just totally different environments. And what PhotoDNA does is it kind of takes, for each image, it returns a matrix. It's like a very small, sort of description of a complex piece of data where you get like essentially an array of 6x6 matrix that kind of describes something about the image. And with that matrix, you're able to kind of ask, how close are these two images? And if they're close enough, you can kind of just write a threshold or figure out a way to say, okay, these two people are the same person. And Microsoft, the team at the time had like a day to do this in a hackathon, and just with 5,000 missing persons images, they were able to correlate and basically get law enforcement to follow up on someone who'd been kidnapped or just was a runaway, and 4 years later ended up having her picture on an escort ad or escort site.
Well, that's another tool that's me actually, and I did this morning. So this is a company called Deep Vision. You're going to see the tools that we're talking about in a context. There's a big tool by the Emancipation Network called Minerva, where they use all these tools together, and they use the elements and some of the methodologies that we brought in today in order to try to rescue victims. So as you can see, I just uploaded this picture, and it was able. You can see it, but it says the age, and it says male, right? It missed me by 20 years. And then you can see the API. And when you see here the API, unfortunately you can't see it. You probably can see it in the slides. It identifies every single face, and then here it tells you subject is likely sex, age, and in some cases ethnicity. This is how the API shows as the video. This is actual video. This is a street camera. And this is basically uploading my picture that I did today. So here's an example of the Python request. Very simple. You can actually apply it. So these things are available. And like Joe said, usually the problem, and I helped somebody that was doing a master's degree thesis at Google and told me that basically the challenge is the interest. There's no commercial gaining in any of this. So, and I have actually talked to Facebook at times, and I understand their perspective. They don't want to become content moderators. And if you probably read the stories of all these outsourced content moderators, they all end up with PTSD, doing drugs. So this is hardcore stuff. So it's very hard at times to find volunteers. And there are organizations like the Delivery Fund that has a lot of ex-targeting officers from either CIA or even the NSA that are joining in order to try to save kids. So here's the tool. I'm not sure if you want to talk about it. It's basically a combination of photo DNA, image analysis by deep vision that just show you what that is. And there's Splunk for Good is there as well. It's sort of like a big data engine. Darkall is actually a company known for indexing over 500,000 sites on the dark web, and they already have it in clear text. There's no possible exposure into it. Like I said before, that's a big deal when you're doing this. You got to protect yourself. They know. I'm just going to say this. They know when you access these sites. And they know if you're a researcher, usually you will go away. And they know when you download tons of the stuff, right? Because that's what they told me. They said, we know if we have patterns for researchers. Like we know if it's a researcher that's trying to catch somebody or trying to probe on the forum, and we know whether there's a consumer that's basically browsing the images and consuming it. And a lot of times, many of these things are backdoor, and that's how a lot of prosecutions come. In conclusion, this is obviously a big problem. We're trying to bring a light to it. There are tools to fight it. We can use all these tools that we brought up today. They have been used. And they have been affected. I think during the hackathon, there were a number of kids that were rescued, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, just during a 24-hour proof of concept with a few different teams, there were, basically like prosecutable cases were created. And I think the biggest issue is finding ways for law enforcement to use this data because it's temporal and there's boundaries that basically change country by country. So the smart people really kind of take advantage of that.
And we'll be making the slides available. Here's some of the resources, and I hope you found this worth watching, seeing. Any questions? Yeah.
So first of all, thank you for your work in this area. This is extremely important, and it's great to see our community reaching out and trying to help. I'm wondering if you might be or have any insight as to different privacy laws around the world. And I know here, when we hear about like police traffic cameras or the street cameras, and those are massive invasion of our privacy. But at the same time, they're invaluable tools for law enforcement for this very purpose. So maybe just briefly kind of expand on that, and if you think that that's maybe one of the contributing factors to why this is becoming harder.
My opinion is this is harder because the corporations don't want nothing to do with this, right? So the tools are there. The ethical, I guess, question is technology is becoming more invasive. We're getting our privacy invaded. If you now add the AI, the home AI that we have, now they have, like for example, I was thinking that you can use Nest camera to profile all your neighbors. You can. I happen to live, and this is an OPSEC failure, in a place where it's, if you're going into my complex, you had to go through in front of my door. So I'm like, I'm going to profile everybody, right? I'm going to use this camera. I'm going to I use the facial recognition, and then I'm going to dox everybody. So now I know everybody that lives here. So that's the point that you can get there, right? Add that to Podnagochi, and now not only you have faces, but you have Wi-Fi. I mean, we can extend the things that you can do. There's, in my opinion, two problems. One, that is an issue. Many people believe that the invasion of privacy is not worth, or it's worth protecting above some of the rights of these victims. And second, it is my experience that corporations want nothing to do with this. I had sat down with people at Facebook. They have incredibly brilliant people in there. They could do more, but there's also this line where is it, would I go from being a corporation to infringing somebody's First Amendment? Who am I to say what it is? Who am I to censor stuff? So, right, yeah.
And just sort of one kind of comment, like on this topic, one of the sort of like Big Brother-esque kind of themes that we've been sort of exposed to, like just learning about the dark side of this problem and the trade-off between privacy and just sort of like ethical kind of like obligations a society has, is that there are people in with power over some of these companies that are basically operating in a gray area and moving data to places where they can eavesdrop, and they're not worried about like privacy laws in the States. So if they move a bunch of email traffic to like the Cayman Islands and have people scrubbing, I would say that's we've heard rumors that these things are taking place by kind of the forces at will that are passionate about this topic and willing to essentially bypass some of the laws that are in place to protect our privacy. So it's a very kind of fascinating, evolving landscape that kind of challenges, what is the right trade-off here.
Actually, I forgot to say that. That's a great point. There's also the fear that once they open up, we'll find out how deep the hole is, right? So that's a problem. Questions?
One more, and
yes, sir.
Try to keep it quick.
Yeah, hi. Just to be preemptive, are there any sites where your family members can upload their own photos? So if something were to happen to them down the road, that they would have a good photo for law enforcement or one of these groups to?
Not to my knowledge. I actually, this is the problem. The problem is once you upload a picture anywhere, there's no way to trust what they're going to do with it. And we know at times that all of us, I'm sure, we have uploaded sensitive data and then the site gets compromised, right? So I usually advise not to upload the least you can, actually. If you want to have, there is some sort of for example, I live in Florida, and there is this government ID, and Miami-Dade has some sort of a ID child registration in case there's some sort of kidnap. You might have a local initiative, but I don't know like nationwide. But I do know, for example, Miami-Dade, the kids, sometimes they even get fingerprinted. But again, now you're giving them pictures and fingerprint, so there is a give and take. I guess we're out of time. Thank you very much.